Hey everybody, this is a quick video to show you how to do today's or this week's participation activity for Econ 1A, looking at national income, specifically GDP. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. We did talk about it in the lecture on yesterday's lecture, which would have been the 17th. So if you have some questions, you can go and check that. And it should be pretty straightforward how to answer these problems using the textbook, but I'm going to go through it with you all anyway, just to make sure that everybody is 100% comfortable. So the first part of the question one, says, what are the four components of GDP? You want to remember that GDP is the total value, the total final market value of all goods and services sold in a country within a year or a given period of time, maybe a quarter. What we're looking for is those four ways that we break down GDP, right? Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX. And we want to remember to break down what those four components are, right? They are consumption, which means anything bought by households and individuals, anything not bought by a business or by a government that's produced domestically. I is investment, and that is anything bought by a company or for a business that's produced domestically within that year, and that includes inventory. So if you produce a bunch of goods in 2020 and you don't sell them all, it still counts as I, because we want to count that productivity for the year, and so we call it inventory, and it'll count for that year or that period's GDP even if it gets sold later on. G is government spending or government expenditure, and that's anything the government buys. So if the government buys a tank, builds a road, builds a school, builds a new building, buys computers, that's all government spending, as long as it's purchased domestically and built that year, produced that year, right? And then the last one is net exports. And that's just saying, hey, we want to make sure that we're only looking at the goods that we actually produce. So it's going to be count everything that we export minus everything we import. So those are the four components of GDP. The next question asks you to identify which component of GDP the following unit items would be. So we have, first up is a Belgian chocolate bar that you buy for a friend. Well, at first, it sounds like consumption because it's something you're buying for a friend, but if it's a Belgian chocolate bar, it's actually an import. And so you can either say that it's an import and it doesn't count, or you can say, well, it's technically negative. That's a negative part of net exports. Either is accurate, right? It's not contributing to GDP, but it is counted as a negative part of net exports. So for example, if it's a $5 chocolate bar, it'll be minus $5 in that large calculation of adding everything up. The next one is a 3D printer for your company. Since it's for a company, that's going to be an investment spending. It's an investment expenditure. It's a purchase that's designed to help the company be more productive over time. And so that's where we would classify it. C is a local city park built this year, and that is going to be government spending, right? Even if it's a city, it's still a government agency, and so it's still a government expenditure. So when they order the fences and the park equipment and maybe some benches, that's all government spending. D, a Big Game USA brand football. Well, usually footballs are purchased by households, not by companies or governments. I can't imagine why the U.S. government might want to buy footballs. Maybe a local government might for a local city league or something like that. But usually I'm going to assume that's going to be consumption, right? It's made in the United States. The brand says Big Game USA, so that's a pretty good hint. And then it is a consumption good. It's something that usually households or individuals will buy. Cool? So that's part two. Part three is when we get a little bit trickier. In part three, we're going to calculate GDP, both real and nominal, in a hunter-gatherer society. So we have this hunter-gatherer society, and we want to find out what the nominal GDP is in 2019 and in 2020. And then we're going to find the GDP deflator for 2020, which means we'll need to use the real GDP. So let's start out with just what the prices are. So we have berries and we have fish, and we have the price and the quantity of both in 2019 and in 2020. And if your question says 2019 and 2018, it's just a typo. Don't worry about it too much. I did update the file, but if you downloaded it before then, you might not be able to see it. So let's go ahead and fill this in. So in 2019, we have 50 berries produced by our economy, and they're worth $6 each. And then we have 100 fish produced in our economy, and they're worth $2 each. In 2020, we have 80 berries and 110 fish. And the berries have increased in price up to $10, and the fish has gone up to $4. So the first thing we want to do is calculate nominal GDP. And remember, nominal GDP uses the current period's prices, so we don't adjust for inflation. To adjust for inflation, we would be looking at real GDP, which we will when we get to the GDP deflator. But for now, we're going to get the nominal GDP for 2019 is equal to the total value, the total market value of all final goods and services produced within this economy within the period of time. So in 2019, we have the market value of berries is $6 times the quantity is 50 plus the market value of fish is $2 times the quantity is 100. So that gives us 300 plus 200, or a total nominal GDP of $500. So far, so good. Kind of straightforward, right? So to get the nominal GDP in 2020, we do the same thing. Now we're going to look at the productivity. We've made our berries were now worth $10 is the market value. And we made 80 berries. And then the market value of fish is now $4. And we caught 110 fish. So that's going to be $800 plus $440, which gives us a nominal GDP of $12.40. Make sense? So far, so good? Cool. So that is number 3. That's done, right? Nominal GDP for 2020 and 2019. Now, if we want to calculate the GDP deflator, we have to go in and find what the real GDP was for 2020. And so that's the tricky part. So let's go in and calculate the real GDP for 2020. Then we can go in and calculate the GDP deflator. Okay? So real GDP in 2020 is going to use the same quantities, but it's going to use these 2019 prices, because what we want to do is we want to take out the inflationary power of those higher prices, right? We want to look at just the productivity, not the changes in price. So we're going to use the value of berries in 2019. The market value of berries in 2019 was $6, and in 2020 we had 80 of them. Plus the market value of fish in 2019 was $2, and we produced 110 of them. So on this one, I'm going to go ahead and pull my calculator out because I hate doing math on the fly. 6 times 80 is $480 plus $220 gives us $700. So that's the real GDP in 2020. Now I'm going to go ahead and kind of take this out so it's a little bit clearer. We want to calculate the GDP deflator. So remember, the GDP deflator is one of our measures of inflation, and it's just 100 times the nominal GDP in a given period divided by the real GDP in that period. And that's going to give us a good measure of inflation because it's going to compare the value of goods in current prices to the base year prices. So for our example, we can go ahead and say we have nominal GDP in 2020 is $1,240. Real GDP is $700. Divide those two and multiply by 100, and we'll get our answer. So 1240 divided by 700 gives us 1.7714, rounding. So our GDP deflator is going to be, for 2020, 177.14. Does that make sense? That's it. Pretty straightforward, right? It's just trying to give you a simple practice problem to go through and review this stuff and try and see it a little bit slowly and get a little bit of extra practice before we get into the homework. So hopefully that makes sense. Remember that the next chapter we talked about other measures of inflation. The GDP deflator is one measure of inflation. The other one is the CPI, or Consumer Price Index. Consumer Price Index goes ahead and fixes a basket of consumer goods, finds the prices of those goods, and then finds the price of the total basket. And then you compare the value of the basket to previous periods to get that consumer price index. And then from the consumer price index, we can also get our inflation rate. The GDP deflator and the CPI are two measures of inflation. They measure it slightly differently, but they tend to move together. And they're both useful measures that we can use when we're looking at our macroeconomy. Let me know what questions you have, and I will see you next time. Have a great day.